Hello, everybody, and welcome to the Revival of America podcast. This is Jenny. I'm the owner and the host of the Revival of America. Today we have SG Anon in the house, everybody. So please feel free to raise your hand if you have a question for SG, and I will unmute your mic at some point in this podcast. Or if you cannot speak, please write your question underneath the comments on the wall underneath his little video there that I have on the wall. Also, to everybody, again, please be careful who you listen to, who you follow, what you put into your mind, because it's getting a little crazy out there. I mean, it's becoming more obvious who these fake people and podcasters, influencers, whatever you want to call them, are. So please, everybody, just be careful. Look for the consistency of the guests and the messaging that they're giving, and then also too, if they're flip flopping, then that should tell you a lot that you need to know. Also, too, everybody, if you come in late to this podcast or you want to share it with somebody, feel free to go follow the podcast host on the podcast host, which are iHeartRadio, Spotify, Anchor, Apple, Google, Breaker, PocketCast, Podbean, Riverside, Amazon Music. Social medias are Jenny JERREAD Facebook at Jenny_JERREAD X, at JJERREAD Rumble, at JJERREAD True Social, at JJERREAD Instagram, The Revival of America right here on Telegram, The Revival of America on YouTube. Let's see, and I think that's it. I'm getting tongue-tied, guys. It's been a few shows today. Also, too, go to the website, check it out, everybody. Sign up for the newsletter at therevivalofamerica.com. You'll get the newsletter weekly. It will give you the show lineups, all the guests, the times, and where I have them, whether it be here or X. And also, too, you'll get you can watch the podcast over there as well, the latest updates on the podcast. And again, that's therevivalofamerica.com. If you guys have a question for myself or any of my guests, want to get in touch with John Baxter, go see John Baxter, or Rick Anson with Brain IQ, whatever it may be. I'm answering the emails on my personal email at the Revival of America at yahoo.com. I'm just getting too many DMs and everything, guys. It's just I'm trying to keep it simple. So email me, the Revival of America at yahoo.com, and I will get back to you as soon as I can with, hopefully answering your questions or whatever you may have there. Also, too, if you have a journey or a story to tell everybody, please submit your story to TROA submissions at yahoo.com. I do vet these stories to make sure they're legitimate, because unfortunately, everybody, we do have those shysters out there that want to make up a false story just to get on a show. So if I do believe it's legit, I will reach out to you via email. We'll get your story, your voice heard on the show. And because remember, everybody, it's going to be your voice, your story that's going to help shape this new world that we are coming into. So with that, everybody, we will wait for SG to come in. But like I said, if you guys have a question for SG or myself, please feel free to start raising your hands. I will unmute your mic. In the meantime, as we wait, if you guys have questions for me, I'll take those as well. So hang in there, everybody. SG should be here shortly. Also, too, I'm going to have a show with Silk tonight over on my X. If you guys didn't hear that in my past shows, that will be at 9 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. I'm trying to get Joshua Reed on, the human encyclopedia, we call him, next week. Trying to get my buddy Rubber Duck on as well, too, because he is definitely a voice. If you're not listening or following Rubber Duck over there on X, I highly suggest you do it. Because he's a wealth of information, everybody. So I'm trying to get those two individuals back on. It's been a minute since Rubber Duck has been here, but Josh was here a couple of weeks ago. But I'm trying to get these guys a little bit more consistent, because these guys are the ones that are really bringing the information and the truth. So a lot of nonsense, a lot of black pilling going on out there, everybody. So I can't stress it enough. Stay out of that noise. It's noise, and it's, again, like I said, becoming more obvious that who these people really are. So hang in there, buddy. Hang on to the positive. A lot of great stuff happening out there. So really hang on to the positive. And if you just don't know who to follow because you're that confused, because it is that confusing, follow Donald Trump. Follow God first and foremost, but follow Donald Trump. And then go check out Rapid Response 47 because they're putting out a lot of great information as well. And Trump is basically, he's telling you without directly telling you. So if you can kind of read through what he's trying to tell you, you'll get it. You'll catch on. But yeah, definitely follow Donald Trump for sure and listen to what he's saying. Good stuff. I know SG was saying he had a sick little guy, so hopefully he's still, I mean, literally, we were just talking, so hopefully he's still okay to come on. He typically gives us an hour of his time, depending, on what's going on. He's got about an hour today, everybody, so let's be mindful. When you request a mic, to try to come up as quickly as you can so we can get on to the next hands and questions. So hopefully, again, we can get him. Well, he'll be coming on here shortly because I did just speak to him. Oh, and for those of you that were over on X this morning, Jake Lang, I was supposed to have a podcast with him over Jake Lang. He's a J6er. As many, if you guys follow him, he's been in Dearborn, Michigan, basically calling out the Muslim Brotherhood. He's gone into the city council and everything. So if you're not following him and what he's doing with that, check it out. He also has recently filed $100 million lawsuit against that. I call him Ma'am Dummy, or Dummy, excuse me. So it'll be interesting to kind of see how that all kind of pans out. So yeah, watch for the rescheduling of that, everybody, for that show, because that one did not happen, unfortunately, because I think he just got kind of busy with everything going on over there in Michigan, and it just fell through the wayside. So it's all good. We'll get him rescheduled. The awkward silence. So yeah, seriously, guys, if you guys have a question for myself, feel free to ask away, everybody. I encourage that. Because we do this here for you. I do this in my spare time. As many of you know, I have a day gig. So if you guys have a question for me, or a question in general, don't be afraid to ask. If I'll give you the best answer I can if I have it. If not, I'll let you know. But there's another thing that I would like to say is, many of you probably see me over on X often because I sit and I listen to, a lot of these spaces and what they're saying, or I co-host with people, or, I'm a speaker in some of them, but I'm consistent with the speaker and co-host of who I do it with over there, right? But sometimes I'll go into these spaces anonymously. Sometimes I listen and just to see what they say. X is very, very far behind us, everybody. I do want to say there's what I'm seeing a narrative on out there right now is regarding the lying stream media, right? I do believe, and I say it often, the lamestream legacy media is not what it used to be, and it's no longer, right. I do believe it's been captured. Um, but I do believe we still have to continue on as kind of the norm, because there are still the people out there that listen to that bullshit. So, obviously Trump is still, because people are like, well, he still goes on for those interviews. Well, I think he's trying to still capture those ones that are in the dead ass comatose sleep, right? So, but they are saying that over there, talking a lot about the lying stream media, and their messaging, and messaging is key. Absolutely. Education is going to be key here in the very near future. Well, as of now, I mean, we've been doing it for however long you've been in this movement, but the lamestream media is not, I believe that it's done. I mean, you see the numbers, nobody is watching the lying stream media. So when you hear that over on X, that it's still going strong, this and the other, no, it's not. I believe it's been captured, but it just can't come out, and you just can't come out and tell the people like that right now. And guess who's just popped into the chat room here, everybody? SG is here. What's up, my friend? It's been a minute.
It has. Good to be here. Thank you for having me back.
Of course. Yeah, I wish I could get you on a little bit more, but I know you've got your little man, and you've got a life in general like I do. So I am just blessed to have you on once a month, and I'll take what I can get from you for sure.
Well, I appreciate it. And it's been quite the time, in the personal world. One of the things that I have come to learn in a pretty significant way is that sometimes you have to focus your attention where it's most important for the moment, so that there is the ability to focus on larger, more expansive things later on, right? It's literally the refinement of focus in real time.
Amen to that. And I always say family first for sure. So blessings to you and your little man, and I hope he feels better.
Thank you. I appreciate that.
Of course. So SG, it's been a month and a lot has happened in a month. I don't know if there's anything particular you want to touch on, but I know there's a lot of positive going on, but there's a lot of that black pilling, doom and gloom still going on out there. And I always encourage my audience, hang on to the positive and stay out of the noise, right? Because it's noise. And I'm just seeing a lot of people, they're listening to the black pilling of it all, and I try to say get out of it, because if your mind's not strong enough, you're gonna feel like you want to start listening to that crap. And there's just so much positive going on. I mean, what would you like to say to the audience? Because I know you have such a strong voice, great voice, and you're kind of that calm to before the storm, right? So, and my audience just loves you. So take it away, my friend.
Well, I'm honored, and you flatter me very much, Jenny, and it's good to be back. I gotta say, on this particular topic, I think this was probably the topic that is most heavily on my heart right now, as I've been looking at the progression of events in my own life, as the things that I've been experiencing in my personal world, in my separate professional world, sort of like by day by night kind of thing. This being distracted and being sucked into the mix, right? Being tempted back into the vortex of whatever reactive program is out there, whatever sort of mass formation is happening in real time. That's something that patriots, I think, are now getting another lesson in, another educational exposure to, if you will, as we look at what's happening out there across the planet right now. And you're right, there's a tremendous amount of positive things happening out there. If we spent more time dwelling on those, we would probably be able to find a lot more of them, even than the ones that are out there right now. But there are some things that are frictional. There are some things that are, tense, that are causing some various contentious areas, and they're refining the gemstone quite literally. So as we go through this process, the black pilling and the wondering who's right and who's wrong, and are they paid off and are they not paid off? I think the better question is to ask what drove the change, if any, if there's any significant change in the messaging behind an individual, behind a person, behind a thing, and then go examine those things. There are material observations that we can make about the activities, for example, of the Trump administration in the current term, especially towards things like, the Israeli state in the Middle East, various situations associated with NATO, certainly what's going on with Crown Prince bin Salman right now. And yet at the same time, when we look a little bit deeper under the hood, we realize that there is a sort of a galvanization, if you will, of economic markets all around the rest of the planet that's playing off sort of under the fray, if you will. It's playing out sort of under the fray and under the surface of all of these different things that are occurring, those material observations that I was talking about just a moment ago. And that movement forward does humanity a tremendous amount of good, regardless of the form that it ends up taking, which for a lot of us is going to be very amorphous and nebulous and difficult to sort of envision and understand, because we don't come from where those cultures are at. I don't know what is culturally significant off the top of my head, for example, to the Democratic Republic of the Congo, or to the South Sudanese area, or other areas around the African subcontinent, or in South America. I understand baseline fundamentals about human nature, and I think all of us sort of get that at the end of the day. And those are the things that we have to rely upon and look towards. What's happening in the political ecosystem that's not at the federal level? Well, we're seeing Democrats indicted left and right for election fraud, but nobody's talking about that. And they're giving up individuals that are associated with those fraudulent operations on the ground. And I'm certain, although this would be an alleged statement, this is a speculative statement, but we'll say I'm semi-certain that a great deal of that is going to tie back to various nonprofits, various NGOs, and probably many names that we're already familiar with and already acquainted with, because the corrupt system at the overarching umbrella level is sort of all in the same beast, and the same beast itself is being assailed on a lot of different angles. So this is a time where, yes, there's a great deal happening that sort of puts us through the fire, if you will, by our faith, makes us walk a little bit without our sight, is asking us to hear when it's difficult to hear, to walk without maybe solid ground under us. Maybe this is a walk on water style moment for a lot of people out there, but it also is teaching us discipline, focus. It's teaching us to look at things at many different levels and to go deeper under the hood with situations. And frankly, Jenny, it's teaching us to come back to that centered place and to realize that not everything we see and not everything we think upon its face value is accurate.
Amen. And then also, amen. I say that to my audience often. Things aren't always as they seem. So thank you for that, SG. Everybody, I'm going to encourage you guys to start raising your hands if you guys have questions for SG. He is here. He's only here once a month. just because obvious reasons. But please, he's here. Let's ask some questions. I've got two for you, SG, if you don't mind touching on, and then I'll go into the comments on the wall and then the raised hands here. So if you can touch on, because I know a lot of people, this is what we're seeing here at the forefront as of what yesterday. Your opinion and your thoughts on the MTG, Marjorie Taylor Greene. I have mine, and I kind of sit back and just kind of laugh a little bit about it. And then if you could touch on that situation, and then the sleeper cells that a lot of people out there are now talking about being, well, I mean, they've been talked about for a while, but now they're really putting the focus a lot on them being activated and potentially harming a lot of people, which I think that's fear mongering, and I'm not about that. But if you could touch on those couple things, I know people would love to hear your take on that as well.
Well, it's fantastic. I think the Marjorie Taylor Greene President Trump feud that we're seeing play out in real time is about as real as the Elon Musk President Trump feud that we saw happening over the summer. So
Yeah.
when we look at what this does, and here's the brilliance of it, right? We're talking about bringing in to the overarching end goal fold about 80 to 90% of the American population. If we're gonna run with what Q says online, 4 to 6% are hopeless. As a statistician, sort of extracurricularly in my own life, I would give it maybe a plus or minus 5 on that. So up to maybe 10% are not going to be able to get really across the line. So that means 9 in 10 are actually reasonable if they're given context for what's occurring and if their real life experience reflects back to them the truth. And that's one of the things that we've seen happening really since the installation of the Manchurian Biden administration, going all the way back to 2021. So in this period of time, we have these various feuds that are playing out. And what are they driving? They're driving awareness towards pedophilic control of the U.S. government and blackmail control by extension, sort of a broader term there, for political power over the U.S. government, to the point where we now have the House GOP, I believe it's the House Oversight Committee under GOP leadership, releasing emails showing that there was a text message exchange of some kind between a sitting member of the Congress during a hearing that was related to the impeachment proceedings and the eventual impeachment attempts during the first Trump presidency against President Trump himself. In other words, Jeffrey Epstein had such an influence on what was happening in U.S. politics that he was literally controlling the pacing and the pulse, if you will, of proceedings to potentially remove a sitting president of the United States. That should be emphasized and dwelt upon just for a moment. And so that this whole feud is drawing massive attention to that from all sides, right? You have a lot of MAGA that comes behind Marjorie Taylor Greene and says, we've seen MTG, we've seen her voting record, we've talked to her in the streets, we've seen her out at these events. MTG is the real deal. I can't believe that President Trump would do this. And then you have another side of things that are saying, well, MTG's made quite a bit of money since she's been in Congress. Some of it might be from her construction company. Some of it might not be from her construction company. We really don't know. It sure seems weird that she came to Congress during the same election cycle that we saw a completely stolen presidential election and a sort of limp noodle Congress that went out and certified that election on the 6th of January in 2021. And so it just, all of this, the back and forth, I think it serves to busy the mind a little bit. But what's happening underneath, and again, sort of this theme of what's going on underneath the fray. Well, what's going on is you have conservatives and hardcore liberals that are talking about the same thing, that are getting on comment threads online on massive platforms like X, Facebook, Instagram, and they're having discussions about the same thing from an area of mutual concern to varying degrees and for varying reasons, right? But everybody is sort of agreeing that sexually based blackmail is not a good currency to be dealing with when you're talking about the levers of geopolitical power. And also when that blackmail is associated with the harming of children and the types of things that have gone on these various extra jurisdictional areas, that adds a whole other dimension to sort of that human instinct. And that human instinct can be called forth even from those gaslit liberals, right? Even from those that are on the far side of the aisle. That instinct has actually been weaponized against them in a dramatic and intense way. So what's happening with President Trump, it's absolutely incredible, is he's appealing, ironically, to the group of people that hates him the most by being the thing that brings them through their hatred, through their confusion lens, through their fog of war, right? By being the thing that they drill in on, and they say, no, there has to be something on this issue. At the same time, you had President Trump slamming MAGA on the face with a banana pie, essentially, and forcing them to step back and go, okay, I hear you. I appreciate you. You are my president. You're a wonderful human being in a lot of ways, maybe not personally, but certainly geopolitically and professionally. But something is clearly here, and I don't idolize you. I don't worship you. I'm not going to see you as faultless, or have some sort of irrational fealty to you. There is clearly something to this issue. We're seeing it played out by the rhetoric and by the behavior of all these individuals in the orbit of this particular feud that's going on right now. And so everyone is sort of pausing for a moment and evaluating, well, how deep did the control, how large-ass was the matrix of blackmail that ties back to individuals like Epstein and others? You know, how far does it actually go? And it's sort of like a narrative prep, if you will, to take us to the next phase of this discussion, which is serious abuse of children beyond just sexual, right? Everyone associates someone like Jeffrey Epstein as being a prolific and proficient blackmailer because he's able to, capture various lewd and inappropriate acts with children on tape. That's sort of the allegation that's always been there. There's a deposition from 2012 where Epstein essentially pleads the fifth to a litany of questions, all tied back to solicitation of minors in various jurisdictions and across various both domestic and international boundary lines. But that particular flavor of things, while grotesque and while, tragic and certainly worthy of capital punishment in and of itself, it does not even come close to the type of things that some of these young ones have been exposed to on these islands in these underground dungeons. And so when we look at escalating the narrative, when we look at bringing people full forefront and center, we have to sort of walk everybody into the gate slowly at the same time, because there's several other levels of gates, if you will. There's several other gates to go through here as we bring this issue forward in consciousness. And we cannot move forward in the Western world, especially with what Moscow knows about what Western oligarchs have been doing to children for the last 500 years in Europe and Africa and South America. We cannot, and right here in North America, we cannot move forward in the Western world geopolitically as a free and fair and just society until this issue is both discovered, made known to the public, and then reconciled.
So, SG, do you think here coming in the next days and weeks, because this is now coming to the surface again, and a lot of us here through the course of our journey, we all saw the unredacted lists of Epstein way before they redacted him, right? Or the so-called list, right? Do you think we're going to see some stuff with this come to fruition here coming in through the holidays? Because I'm hearing that it's going to kind of get a little bumpy here in the next coming days, weeks, months.
It's interesting. I actually am able to say, believe it or not, that I have a couple of journalistic style sources on this particular issue, on the ongoing DOJ investigations into Epstein and the various, arenas and circus that he was involved in. One of those sources is ancillary to some litigation that's been going on in the Virgin Islands for over 20 years now with respect to a company that was forced into bankruptcy because of a no bid situation that was supposed to include a double blind bid, according to the laws on the ground in the Virgin Islands at the time. And that company was forced into jurisdiction because there was another company that was coming in to do the same type of work that actually tied back to business associates of Mr. Epstein, and also the then Virgin Islands governor, whose name escapes me, but this would have been the 2007, 8, 9 time period. And that individual has told me a couple of different times that what began as a 4-prosecutor U.S. and deputy U.S. attorney team in the Virgin Islands in 2019, 2020 has now escalated to almost 30 prosecutors and investigative officials. And they're in more than 20 different jurisdictions now tracing this money and how this tied back to control on the ground. And these bankruptcy proceedings specifically showcase, allegedly, how this corruption tied down the Third Circuit Court of Appeals, which has jurisdiction over that particular area, but also happens to be the constitutional circuit for the domestic U.S. Landscape. And so this entire situation that has gone on with respect to this, I think that we're going to see significant movement, simply because you cannot have an investigative team of that size investigating nothing. and you're not going to be able, I don't think, to hide the type of investigative discoveries that are made in the process of these proceedings as they go forward in the information age, quite literally, because in addition to just good old, citizen journalists out there and individuals that are willing to put themselves through the bureaucratic hoops to find out what, if anything, was found, you also have significant nation state and para-nation state actor capability with respect to hacks, with respect to data leaks, with respect to data dumps. And all we have to do is look at 2025 and the 6 separate major worldwide cyber attacks that have happened just this year, which affected entire platforms and areas of e-commerce and service, here in the Western world as a result of those attacks. And that's only been within the last, this is November, so 11 months or so at this point. So looking at what's happening, I think that we're going to see expansion in this. I think the other thing that we're going to see, though, is the web being expanded not only from politics and celebrities, but down into academia in a big and significant way. And when we talk about academia, we're not just talking about universities. We're talking about individuals that may have been cooked and incubated in these universities that are now the heads of regional hospital associations or regional healthcare associations or regional accreditation societies, or the bar association, things like that. In other words, these very large bastions of power that are sort of pseudo connected to Americanized academia, but are not directly emanating from the universities, although some of them do. You have secret societies like Skull and Bones that emanates directly from fraternal brotherhoods associated with universities. But a lot of these associations just in general make a great deal of policy enforcement. They have a great deal of power, and they're captained in many regards by individuals that are a product of the big academia, which has now been proved out a little bit so far with respect to like individuals connected to Harvard, for example, to be connected to these very large, sexual blackmail and trafficking and control rings. And I expect that to come out in a much grander light over the next 3 to 6 months.
Wow, that's huge. So right there, everybody, that just tells you, for people who are saying nothing is happening, that alone right there is huge. Thank you for that, SG. That was great information. And then before we go into questions, so everybody start raising your hands. I will unmute your mic. Can you touch a little bit on these sleeper cells? The fear mongering.
Well, I can touch on that, but I think I'm going to be waxing repetitive because it doesn't really change the understanding that patriots have had since we watched COVID happen in real time. The activation of all of these different bureaucratic obstacles, the lockstep style insurrective behavior that happened, especially in blue states and any state under Democrat control at the governor level. And then, of course, the election of 2020 and what occurred with that. We've all sort of understood from those moments in time that we are heavily, heavily infiltrated, that there is a great deal wrong with the landscape internally inside the United States. We can feel it. Our communities don't look like they did when we were little. And, that's coming from someone who's in his 30s, right? This is not, ancient history. This is relatively recent history. I'm a product of rural middle-class America, sort of lower middle class, $40,000 a year, parental salary kind of thing. And I used to be able, when I was very young, to ride my bike for a half mile or a mile in any direction away from the house. There were a couple of side roads. There were a few open fields that I could cross through. There was a significant amount of farmland over to the northwest of where we lived. But other than that, it was sort of like a spaced out suburban neighborhood. That very same area in this day and time is no longer recognizable due to the Burmese population. And this is not as a statement against Burmese people. I love all people of all kinds. I'm quite literally a patriot for all humanity everywhere. But it is to say that fundamentally and visibly and visually, our societies have changed, and we're aware of that. And there's nothing wrong with acknowledging that and admitting that. However, it is important, I think, to walk our paranoia back a little bit and understand that there's a massive difference between some cultural engineering and a significant sleeper cell operation, and both are at play right now on the soil of the domestic homeland of the United States. This is one of the reasons Trump has been pre-positioning National Guard all over the place. We've got justification rolled out in Memphis. We've got Baltimore on the chopping block. We've got Chicago ongoing. We have Portland situation that's ongoing. We have a military general out of the Portland National Guard area. I think it was the Oregon National Guard chain of command saying that he was going to order his soldiers to defy federal orders, right? So we have to handle those style situations that are happening. I'm expecting these sleeper cells, if you want to call them that, really what they are is just various nodes of the same blob that's acting on at the behest of the same coordinated financial and cultural engineering entities. As they continue to activate, I'm expecting the Trump administration to keep them against the glass and to hold the pressure up. We've got more than 500 to 600 National Guards, some as high as 1,000, that are currently activated across the entirety of the United States in all 48 continental states. We also have the National Guard supporting Marine Corps operations in the Caribbean, of all places, which ties back to one of those Q drops that is very famous with respect to the National Guard and the Marines sort of working in coordination. We saw that on the ground also in Los Angeles earlier this year. And so for people out there, when they say, what about these sleeper cells? Well, we have to drag the poison out. That's just part of it. And it's not a poison from the last 4 years. It's a poison from the last 40 years. It's a poison going all of the way back to the Reagan era, and the ability, the level of control that they were able to assert over the Reagan administration with respect to the immigration issue in particular, even to the point where there was an attempted takeout of the man I believe it was in the mid 1980s or so. And so coming forward to today, we have to be able to root the entirety of that infestation out. It's not just the insurrection of the last 10 years. It's a longitudinal selling out, infiltration, insurrection, whatever you want to call it. They'll have to invent a new word for seditious conspiracy when this is all over, because you have to pull that rot out of the system. And I think President Trump has placed our country in a situation to be able to do that. We have an economic renaissance that's being teed up. We're seeing it coming out in some areas already. The rollout is slower in other areas. We clearly have shifting in the financial ecosystem of the entirety of the world, and that's affecting what's happening in North American markets, both financial and commoditized. We have a very strong national leadership team associated with immigration, asserting their authority as federal law enforcement, sort of gearing up the country for this state versus federal conversation that's going to have to come in at some point. We have the judiciary now drug out as a cooperative, insurrective component of what has occurred with the globalist agenda here in the United States over the last 9, 10, 11 months. And so I think we're being quite literally shown the pattern of the pattern of escalation, if you will, to expect as we go forth towards this period where there's going to have to be some sort of a reckoning. We've talked a lot on this show, Jenny, about things coming out of sort of a civilization level pause style event where perhaps there's some sort of joint scare event or some sort of even an astronomical event that might galvanize the world. We've talked about ETs and such. It doesn't really matter what it is. There will be an event or sequence of events as we go forward in that push and pull, in that call and response dance, that escalating level of pressure that's been building for a while. That brings us to a point where society has to stop and reflect and actually ask what it is that we want for the American dream and for our children and for our posterity. And that's the goal, I think, at the end of the day. And we're working clearly towards that. So I have full confidence that we go forward here and we do see some escalating pressure in response to the victories that are being had in finance and trade and all sorts of different cleansing out operations that are happening all over the planet with respect to the underground component. There's spec ops running right now in the Caribbean under the surface narrative cover of all of this stuff respected to narco terrorists. Some of these spec ops are interdicting underground systems beneath airports on these Caribbean islands that have housed God only knows what. But in one case, we can confirm based on a mainstream news article going back almost 30 years that there are bioagents and heavy amounts of human trafficking associated with one of these islands. I forget the name of it. It might be St. Croix, but don't quote me on that. But regardless, there's spec ops from the U.S. Air Force on the ground at the same time that these things are occurring. There's a lot of push and pull that's happening, and I would expect that to show itself to us in a rather public way. And President Trump has continued to highlight for us during this entire period. It's all Soros. It's all the Democrats. It's all the Clintons. It's all, he continues to name these sort of cornerstone faces, if you will, these household components of what has occurred here, because eventually these household components and the entirety of the web that surrounds them, which as we've seen very recently is even more enormous than we thought it was prior to, all of it is going to have to come down and be reconciled.
Amen to that. See, everybody, don't you just love having SG on? He's such, I love it when you come on, SG. You just that calm to the storm for many. So I appreciate it. All right, everybody, now we're going to go into taking your questions now. So please feel free to raise your hand or write your question on the wall underneath SG's little video right there. So Palm Mom, you had raised your hand in the beginning, so go ahead.
I was just going to say, I was going to ask you, but then SG came on. So thank you. Thank you both for being here. My question was about McDonald's. Was he proing it or conning it? Because I didn't catch the gist behind that whole thing. Thank you.
I think that's a fantastic question. As I look at what President Trump did with the image that he cast with McDonald's, both during the first Trump presidency, if you remember, there was a great deal of McDonald's catered to the White House. Mainstream media had an absolute cow over all of it. And then, of course, during the campaign trail of 2022, 3 and 4, we saw those sort of like public display ops with McDonald's, for lack of a better expression of it. As I've reflected on that and looked back at it and looked at the research showing the different reorientation of some of these beef supply chains, especially in the Western Hemisphere, many of which are going to intrinsically affect any U.S. corporation that has its feelers and its business elements in those markets. McDonald's is one of a handful that does. But what it looks to me like almost is that, you know, he's basically flaunting them by partying in their own house. It's sort of like, we came in, we took your stuff, and now we're going to use your stuff and have a big old party and showcase how awesome everything is because we actually took control of things. And when you look at what's happened with McDonald's in Russia, McDonald's in Japan, McDonald's in Mongolia, McDonald's in China, just in the last 7 or 8 years or so, all of them have received either outright bans or extreme curtailments and much, much higher regulatory interaction and interactivity with their supply chains in country. In other words, their supply chains got subjected almost overnight during that first Trump presidency to much heightened levels of scrutiny relative to what it was prior to that. And that's notable because China and Russia are essentially two of the other nodes, if you will, worldwide nodes where sort of currency power, geopolitical power, and military power emanate from and balance themselves off of. So I find it very, very fascinating, the public optics behind McDonald's, and that's probably the best answer that I could give.
Thank you, SG.
Thank you, Pom Mom. Thank you, SG. All right, Miss Sally, your mic is unmuted. Go ahead. Go ahead, Sally. Your mic is unmuted. Hit the blue button in the middle of the screen.
Hello, I really enjoy listening to everything that's going on. And one of my concerns that I'd like to hear your feedback on, SG, is the digital ID and how that's rolling out in the US, around the world, because I'm calling from Mexico. So we're starting to get, you know, with our president, people are standing up here, but I'm concerned with what they're doing and how we can opt out of the digital ID.
Well, I will say that I'm fundamentally and just at a baseline level, I'm against any sort of digital tracking component, you know, technology of any kind. I think that, you know, heightened digital surveillance at the end of the day defeats liberty rather than enhances it. At the same time, and I want to qualify this statement when I answer this question, because this is actually something I've been dwelling on, you know, sort of in my own personal prayerful meditation times as I've gone through, especially over the last 3 to 5 months, and seen the types of things that have come down. And I have wondered to myself out loud many times, you know, why, God, would this be allowed to move forward in an era where we're supposed to be restoring liberty, where we're supposed to be restoring this idea of personal sovereignty, personal control, personal guarantee over one's own body, right? My body, my choice. That was sort of a big thing that resurged during the height of the COVID era. So, and what I distinctly am feeling back from that, and, you know, coming to understand more and more as I've spent time in those prayerful moments, is that the very technology, the very capability, the very infrastructure and scaffolding that was created to destroy all of what freedom is and all of what freedom can be for humanity is now being utilized to destroy their freedom. And so when you look at the ability to map transactions in real time across the entirety of planet-wide ecosystems that tie into black market funnels or offshore shell companies that are siphoning money to terrorist groups or to arms groups or to black market criminal gangs and things of that nature, these transactions are now capable of being tracked in real time because software systems and digital monitoring is at such a scale and such a power that it can keep up. The same is true when we look at what's happening with respect to the laundering of money inside the U.S. government. And none of us needs to be convinced that the U.S. government is laundering money. We can clearly see that that's happening. But when we talk about the different, hundreds of thousands of different funnels that siphon off of, say, just the Ukrainian conflict, just that one conflict alone, and all of the different parties and hands that are in the trough that are then taking that illicit money, washing it clean with something else and essentially trying to make it untraceable, and God only knows what it's getting used for. We certainly know some of what it's been used for. When we look at that and trying to generate a map of that, if we were utilizing pen and paper, for example, that's a 10-year investigation just on its own. We're talking about one financial criminal RICO conspiracy being a 10 to 15-year law enforcement endeavor because it's just so Goliath in scale. So looking at what's happening around the entirety of the world and the digital ecosystem and the digital IDs and all of this stuff, the biometrics now that Europe's wanting to collect from international travelers, including those coming from the United States, measures that none of us in our right mind would ever vote for, would ever say that these are good things. There is a silver lining to them, and that is the fact that because we do have patriot actors in control, in my opinion, this is my opinion based on research and what I've seen playing out in the last 7 years, because we have some of those patriotic actors in control of some pretty important and key influential areas, especially related to international cooperation inside law enforcement, international cooperation inside specific task forces like human trafficking and international kidnapping task forces. When we look at those individuals in control in various military pulpits and in governmental pulpits, like Kirill Dmitriev from Moscow and his X account, which is now very prolific inside the U.S. landscape and ecosystem, I think we can safely say that while we don't agree with the method of what has been thrust upon us, what has been brought forth into the world, at least we have the handle now. And we can point that in another direction rather than right at our throats, which is where it's been pointed since it was conceived and incepted in the late 1980s and early 1990s. So this is an issue that I tell patriots: continue to hold your principles, continue to express what it is that you do and don't want. Make sure to be vocal about how you feel with respect to surveillance and digital monitoring and invasion of privacy. What does illegal search and seizure actually mean? How should we interpret that? Let's have these discussions, but acknowledge in the immediate time, in this moment, those very things are being utilized in some capacities to stop the evil that conceived them to begin with.
Okay, thank you for that. I'm just concerned about the, obviously the digital, what they can do with the bank accounts and the biometric, but I agree with you. I do think about it myself. I go back and forth because I know it can be used for good and as well as evil. So thank you for that.
And SG, would it be safe to say that they're, like you're kind of saying, a little bit like as if their own weapons that they've had in play for us is being used on them? Because, Trump always says, we have it all, we've caught them all, right? So would that be kind of a fair assessment too?
Oh, I absolutely think that it would. And when we look at, let's stop and step back and consider the philosophy that underpins what we'll call this Great Awakening, or this operation inside the U.S. government to reverse this corruption that began really before President Trump, but certainly got underway publicly in the first Trump administration. And we've got all of these, almost 5,000 different drops by this entity called Q, highlighting how some of this is happening and what's going on here. And what's the flavor of all of that? The flavor of all of that is what they built for evil, God has turned to good. What they put out for our destruction has become their destruction. The forts that they created were captured or cleaned out, and now they're being used against them. The technology and infrastructure that they've been hiding and suppressing for so long has been shifted in ownership or holding or possession or influence or control in many regards. There's some case to be made that maybe there's some more work to be done on that, but in many regards we've seen the effects of that happening, and now we're blasting their satellites literally out of the sky. How many of your listeners out there on this call alone have seen the different videos, probably half a dozen now, just over the last 5 years, where you're seeing these flaming streaks falling out of what looks like low atmosphere? These are satellites that have been quite literally shot out of the sky because they were weaponized against the peoples of the planet in more than one way. Some of them had, ionospheric heaters on board that were able to affect entire climatic patterns. Some of them had stratospheric heaters and various depolarizers that were on board that were able to adjust the electric conductivity in the atmosphere and change wind currents. I mean, you're talking about climate weapons that were on these airborne platforms, and none of us even knew about that. So taking this whole period and appreciating it for what it is literally stealing the spear out of their hand and for the first time pointing it back at them. And they really don't know what to do with it. We've seen a lot of them, I think, that came along and either were opted into submission or coerced into submission somehow or agreed to play ball. And Q told us that would happen with some individuals. And then you have others that look very confused and are acting even more aberrant and crazy with each passing day. And maybe those are the ones that didn't take the deal that was made or that was offered. Maybe they're confused and they don't understand what's going on. The point is, we have flipped the script. We have taken the entirety of what was built to move humanity off of this earth, and we're using it to enhance our control and our stewardship of this earth. Nothing, in my opinion, Jenny, is more godly than him literally coming in, taking all of their playthings and turning them against them and putting them in the hands of the true heirs.
Amen. So everybody remember that when you're hearing all this negativity out there, blackpilling, whatever, doom and gloom, always remember what was meant for bad could always be used for good. The boomerang is happening, everybody. Their weapons they had that they were going to use on us are going to be turned on them. So that was awesome explanation. And I hope all of you guys remember that when you're out there listening to different people. Just put that in the back of your mind. It's a boomerang. It's coming back on them. Okay. So, cause I get a lot of emails. People are get kind of scared with some of these things that people say out there. So just know that, like SG said, I mean, it couldn't be more of a godly thing, it coming back around on them. And I guess, we're witnessing God's hand, right? Cause this is good versus evil. So, God's going to destroy the evil. All right. Let's see who's next. Trump Train, go ahead.
Good evening, Jenny and SG.
Hello.
All right, I want to bring up something about the shutdown, the 42-day shutdown that the government shut down, and they extended it to January the 30th. A lot of patriots are losing hope, and I don't want them to lose hope because we're all watching this play out, and a lot of the people feel like that Trump has turned on the patriot community, which he has not, only because he is pushing all this foreign stuff, trying to settle all the dust, let the dust settle overseas and all, for that prayer and blessing that we are all waiting for. So, SG, I'm just going to ask you, because my question was answered earlier before me, but what do you think about the upcoming deal? If the blessing comes, do you still think that we will go into 120 days and have new elections or not? Thank you, brother. I love you.
Well, likewise, it's appreciated. You honor me. I'll say this. With respect to the 120-day conceptualization, I think that when we talk about that, what we're talking about is the collapse of some sort. There's going to have to be a downturn of some kind in the Western world financial structures in order to implement new structures, because there has to be a publicly obvious need. There has to be an issue that is patently apparent nationwide. Everybody sort of can understand it, see it, agree on it, even if their politics are askew. And that sort of ushers in whatever comes as a result of that. If we see that tying directly into election fraud, or perhaps a ruling from the Supreme Court, and I wouldn't put that out for this upcoming spring and summer session with the court, with respect to the 2020 election going into the midterms, I think we could absolutely see, perhaps 120 days back from the 2026 midterms, we see some things really begin to kick off. Ironically, that's right around the 4th of July, which is the 250th anniversary this coming next year of the American Republic. And that's going to be a significant and symbolic year and date just in itself, because you only get 4 of those per every millennium, right? You get 4 punctuated cycles on that rotation, on that timelines, on that chronology, if you will, that chronological progression is what I'm trying to say, throughout a millennium period, and 1,000 years is quite a long time. So looking at what's happening with that, I could see something like that, occurring. I'm not going to stake my hat on it, because these days I have to admit I don't stake my hat on a whole lot anymore. But what I will say with respect to what you talked about a second ago about patriots being, confused and sort of looking at what President Trump's talking about and finding themselves, having a hard time reconciling that with what he said on the campaign trail. It's really brilliant in a masterful way, because what it's doing is it's inciting the conversation. It's inciting the national debate. It's causing people to come forth and say, no, 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 no. You said X, Y, Z, and this is why we elected you, and this is what we want as the American people, right? And this is a dynamic period of time. Our desires as a culture throughout the last 5 years have definitely shifted, have they not? And so as we go forward, our desires are going to be prone to shifting again. So we have to keep dialing in and holding these objects of national importance, the torch of those issues of national importance. We have to hold that as we go through all of this different evolutionary period, if you will, or change. Period of change is really a better way to express that, because a lot of it gets lost in the muck, a lot of it gets lost in the fray. And we find out, when you look at history and you look at the progression of civilizations, you find out that most of the time it was the social issues that started their collapse, but it was an inability to agree on the big stuff that actually caused a societal collapse that was unrecoverable, or a splintering that was not healable throughout the core of a population group. When a population group cannot agree on what a man or a woman is, you have a problem there. And it's much deeper than social nuance. That I would submit to you, that goes back to national security, because what is the military composed of? It's composed of fighting age men, and that's what the entirety of human history has shown us is the effective way to sort of look at that. So the same in a different way, in a more relevant and focalized way in the modern era, is being played out right now in the United States. Do we want foreign labor, or do we want American labor, or do we want both, but heavily skewed in favor of the American domestic citizen? I think the debate should be had. We should have these forums. We should decide these things. But President Trump's job, in a lot of ways, is not only to see an America First agenda created and then executed for the American people, it's also to help the American people come out of a dream spell of this walking trance that they've been in for a half century or better, where the political discussion is either this or that, and that does not have to be the case.
Thank you, brother. I love you, and I love you, Jenny.
Thank you, Trump Train. We love you too. All right, SJ. I think what did I say that right? SJ, your mic is unmuted. Go ahead. Do you have a question for SG? I've seen you pop up here a couple times. Okay, I'm going to move on, guys, because he's only got a certain amount of time. Miss Grace, go ahead. Your mic is unmuted.
Hi, Jenny. Thanks for all that you do, of course.
Hello.
And SG, thank you too. You're such a patriot, and we love you. I follow you a lot, as well as Jenny. But real quick, my question. I know this is not going to be popular, but I'm going to ask because I think everybody feels this heat. My husband and I are small business owners. It's actually a pretty large business, and we're very blessed. But needless to say, it's a small business considering other businesses in America. To us, it's not. It's our livelihood and our children's future. We pay an astronomical amount of taxes every year, and we pay them on time, and we've always paid them. But it is a lot. I mean, couple $100,000, and it's just no fun ever because they tax you to death. We were hoping that this year we would not see that come due, and we would not have to pay into a system that I literally want to vomit over, because I know what they take our money. I'm not saying they're doing it still, but I know where our money has been being spent on the trafficking of children, on horrendous things, the deep pockets of Nancy Pelosi. So it really sickens me that we wake up every day and work so hard for our family and our community and our children, and then it is literally taken to do horrendous things with. So knowing what they've been doing with our taxes, I almost can't sleep at night thinking I'm still paying these. But we got our bill, it's due, and if we don't pay it, we can't run our business. Somebody said, well, just don't pay it. Well, we can't do that. We have banking, we have lending, we do a very large home business. So we have to be able to do banking and lending, and we deal with mortgage companies. Yes, I said the M word. But anyhow, so what is your thoughts on this ending sometime and freeing Americans from this tax issue that we get pounded with everywhere we go? Thank you again, and God bless you.
Man, that is a powerful question, and thank you for the work that you all do and for working so hard and providing a livelihood not only for your own future but for the future of many others. I really appreciate and respect that a lot. It takes sort of a self-determinative and very independent metal here in the United States to do that. We have a unique system in that regard. I will say that on this issue, I have wondered about the taxation component of these changes that have been happening across the entirety of the political system, going back really since the first Trump presidency. And I can remember President Trump as early as 2015, 2016, floating the idea that income tax really wasn't a great thing, that it didn't do very good for small businesses, it didn't do very good for the individual earner. Most of the money was not being used for what it should be used for, and that there were better ways to pay those bills. And I don't remember him outright endorsing tariffs at the time. That may have floated its way into the conversation. I know at one point in time during the first presidency it did in sort of a lighter way. It's obviously the heavy focus now. But what I would guess I would draw your attention to, what I draw my own attention to, is what President Trump has said numerous times now publicly, both at rallies and after coming into office, and that's this reimagination of the IRS and the supposed 87,000 individuals that were hired and then not hired, and then part of them were hired and then they were furloughed. This tariff issue that he continues to dive down on, and now we're talking about stimulus checks back to a certain, tariff, I guess I should correctly phrase this, tariff checks back to certain Americans under a certain age group, which would obviously expand as the tariff component continues to expand going forward. But I think the landscape that President Trump is setting up is the discussion of the elimination of the income tax entirely and a repurposing of how the tax structure is actually carried out inside the United States. And logically, that would have to occur if you're going to take over the Federal Reserve. And as we look at what happened in 2020 with President Trump's maneuvers with, I think they were called special lending vehicles that tied back to the Federal Reserve and the Treasury, and how the Fed and the Treasury's relationship changed as a result of one of those executive orders. He's floated this idea of a national emergency tying back specifically to mortgages, the issuing of mortgages and the abuse of the mortgage system and the mortgage lending system at the high level to address that, which that would invoke the International Economic Emergency Powers Act, which ironically happens to be before the Supreme Court in the present day and time. I've been out of the loop about a few days on this issue, so it may have been ruled on by now, but it was very recently before the court, just over the last 7 days or so, and that essentially deals with the power of the president to enforce fiscal policy changes inside the United States over and above Congress, which constitutionally has a great deal of power in that area. And I'm waxing a long time on this question, but I'm trying to paint the entirety of the landscape as I look at it. So with respect to the average ordinary person, with respect to the wage earner, with respect to the wage payer, and those that are here legally, that have been here legally their entire life, that are doing business here in the United States of America, it only makes sense that you would hype up the taxation issue and hype up the tariff issue and all of this money coming in, and then at the same time we've got rhetoric in the narrative talking about this national emergency about mortgages, and we've got governors being fired and then rehired and then fired at the Federal Reserve. And now we have a Fed, it's sort of a Trump acolyte at one of the Federal Reserve governorships as an interim governor. That might even be the one out of New York, if I'm not mistaken. All of this is pointing to a complete refacing of how finance and taxation is done here inside the United States of America. And I wish I could prognosticate and prophesy on how that would actually be and what that would actually look like. But in truth, I do not know. All I do know is that when we look at the rhetoric and we examine not only President Trump's statements, but mostly President Trump's statements, but a lot of statements from individuals like Shinzo Abe, like the new Prime Minister of Japan, Crown Prince bin Salman, a number of individuals in American finance, including Jamie Dimon at one point along the way, all of them have said that the United States is changing fundamentally at the economic level, and world trade is changing fundamentally at the economic level, and that's going to have to adjust. It's going to have to reflect back a change in the system. And while the change has not materialized this year, like I was hopeful back in January and February that we would see, I do think that we're going to see something significant in the next 18 to 24, because by that time, we're going to be looking at having to secure and concrete some of these changes, which means they will have needed to have already happened.
Thank you, SG. Thank you, Grace. Did that answer your question?
Yes, thank you so much, SG, and thank you, Jenny, for all you do. God bless you both.
Thank you, Grace. Thank you for always being here. Okay, how you doing on time, Mr. SG?
I've got time for one more.
Okay, you got it. All right, Miss Archer, go ahead. Your mic is unmuted.
I'm bringing up the caboose again. Thank you, Jenny. And SG, always a pleasure. Very grateful for the platform. Um, I don't think I heard you mention this. You may have in the past, but what do you think's really going on in Venezuela? I mean, my gut's telling me this is already a done deal, and we're just watching a bunch of, rhetoric and things like that. And I do say that because I've heard somebody say that they had like a family member about over 6 months ago go to Venezuela and say that everything would seem like it was fine. I mean, people weren't eating out of trash cans and all the craziness that we see here because we're getting such bad information. So, do you feel that it's pretty much already done and we're just playing it out? The same as it's my gut's telling me anyway.
Well, I think it's really fascinating. How much of it is already done is probably above my pay grade, but I'll say this. The entirety of what's happening in the Caribbean basin and in South America, in my opinion, is a multi-layered psyop. And the reason I say that is because we have the Secretary of War drawing our attention to certain military activities and not even mentioning others. And yet these others are being published on military websites and publications, .gov and .mil websites, and even .com websites that are associated directly with some of the services. But they're not receiving any press attention of any kind or commentary from the secretary or the president or any what we would call major influential TV general. And some of those deal with, I mentioned earlier, special operations deployments on the eastern side of the Caribbean. Some of them deal with naval equipment designed for very deep water surveillance and sort of like nonstop monitoring of submarines and things being deployed to the area. And it's only announced in like a tweet or on a news release on af.mil or on navy.mil or spaceforce.mil or whatever. So looking at all of these different things and the constellation of circumstances that surrounds just the military component alone. That doesn't even talk about the weirdness with the economics. It doesn't talk about the fact that commercial shipping is not interrupted at all. It doesn't talk about the fact that aerial traffic through the Caribbean is pretty normal, which you wouldn't think that you would have, airliners flying across, hot strike zones and hot combat zones where you're, blowing up narco terrorists with airborne projectiles and things like that. Not to say that some of that may not be happening. It may very well be happening. But in my opinion, a great deal of what's happening down there is a psyop. And so the question then becomes, well, what's the psyop to cover? What's the psyop running cover for? Or what is the psyop designed to draw our attention away from? And I would submit that it's designed to draw our attention away from two major things. The biological agent funnels that come out of South America, especially Central South America, think Paraguay, Uruguay, Bolivia, those areas. There's a ton of biological agent trafficking that comes out of that area of South America. And there's an enormous amount of arms dealing that goes on internationally, intercontinentally on the South American continent between the various nations. And this is one of the reasons that when Javier Milei came to power in Argentina, you saw a significant disruption in the politics in Brazil because a lot of those money funnels were turned off as that carousel that was going through Argentina, Paraguay, Chile, and a couple of these other areas really dried up in a significant way with his purge of all the government regulatory agencies, which extended into some of the Argentinian military. Didn't get a lot of international press attention, but we saw some departments that were eliminated from the Argentinian military. And I find that very interesting that we saw the timing of some of that political instability almost exactly at the same time. So what's occurring, in my opinion, is the attacking of, or the mapping of, or the interdicting in some capacity of these types of pathways that are happening, and they're happening not just in a militarized sense, but they're happening in a paramilitarized sense and in a private corporate sense. The rhetoric surrounding Chevron and Nicolas Maduro saying, that Chevron could have access to all of Venezuela's oil and all of Venezuela's natural resources. That's sort of almost redundant to say. Chevron has, and Citgo back in the day, had tremendous control, nearly total control over of the Venezuelan oil industry and how that tied back to the worldwide oil markets. And that particular control was sort of welcomed by the Venezuelan government at the time, that was benefiting from a great deal of that. But you had a playground of corruption that was supported by that control. And there's a lot of evidence to suggest that some of that stuff, especially on the oil fields, involved child slave labor, deaths that were never explained, things like that, people disappearing in the middle of the night. And so when you look at that and you look at that landscape that needs to be cleaned up, and we appreciate what's happened with the Maduro government over the last 7 years, what has occurred? Venezuela has certainly been weakened. We've seen Venezuela become much more vulnerable internationally, and yet fortified in other ways by nations, not individuals, but nations like Russia and China. We've seen Venezuela interactive with American corporate interests again, whereas for a long time, even beginning under the Hugo Chavez government, we saw some of that interactivity prohibited and completely cut off, including certain resource lines that were seized. So what's happening now looks like just the play out of exactly what you talked about a moment ago. We have to rebalance that landscape. We have to stop the true criminal underbelly that persists all through South America and has for over half a century now. We have to interdict that and find a way to prevent that. Venezuela is an offloading and onboarding site when it comes to the continental appearance itself. It's got a large coastline at the top. It's got highly active ports. It's got access to the Caribbean Sea. The Caribbean Sea. It's got access to the Panamanian Canal just right up the road, essentially. So it's an important strategic area. But there's a lot that's going on, in my opinion, with respect to that whole hemispheric component of the intelligence community and what has been created as a result of it over the last 50 or 60 years or so. And so, and I'm waxing a long time on this, but this particular issue I've been trying to wrap my head around as well. And I appreciate ending on this question, because it's a great question, because it deals with what's truly happening in the world. You've got individuals like Tucker Carlson, who I respect a great deal, that are missing the broader picture here. This is not starting a regime change operation in Venezuela. This is returning power to the Venezuelan people, and they've not had that power for 50 years. They didn't have it under Chavez. They didn't have it under Maduro. They didn't have it under the guy before Chavez. They didn't have it under any of the parties really since the oil crisis of the 1970s. And so looking at what's happening there on the ground right now, and this could be extended to a lot of South America because of the types of intelligence infiltration that have gone on there. It's just a cleanup of a very old problem that cannot be cleaned up in any other fashion. And it requires some nerves of steel as we go through this process, because we saw Nicolas Maduro with a red folder shortly after the 2020 election here in the United States. And that was right around the same time that we saw images emerging online of Kim Jong-un, of President Putin, of President Donald Trump, all holding these interesting looking and very similar looking red folders. I would submit that there's just a lot more happening there, and it ties back to the intelligence community.
Thank you, SG. Thank you, Archer. Did that
Thank
answer
you.
your question?
Yes, it did. Thank you.
Thank you, Archer. And everybody here, thank you, SG. He is with me once a month, everybody. And SG, I want to say thank you for coming. As always, it's a pleasure. You're a strong voice in this movement, but definitely a calm to the storm for many. So I want to say thank you. And God bless you. And I hope your little man gets better soon.
God bless, Jenny. Thank you for having me. Have a good
Of
night. Of
course. I will get you scheduled right away for next month.
Sounds
Thanks, SG.
wonderful.
Have a great
God
night.
bless all.
Good night, everybody.